Alex Preddy, when he was shot, his hands were on the ground. He did not have a firearm in his hand. Border Patrol should not have been there. Border Patrol should be patrolling the border.
I feel like our administration wanted this type of escalation. I don't think Renee Good deserved to be killed. We sometimes feel like they're waiting for one of us to be shot and killed.
What did you think about the Alex Preddy shooting?
That one was also particularly traumatic.
Was Renee Good a criminal? No. Was she acting like a bitch? Yeah.
How do you feel about the phrase ICE?
I try not to take it personally.
All your homophobia, all your racism, all your transphobia, all your xenophobia. Everyone go f yourself.
Your family, your kids, nigga. That's how it is. I can't sleep comfortably because of you.
I just feel like we've been in the pocket of the administration, kind of doing their bidding and wrapping up as many people as possible.
We've been mislabeled as Nazis, homophobes, as racists in law enforcement. That's just not true.
They're doing exactly what the Gestapo did back in the Nazi regime.
We are not deportation officers, and we are not people who go out and grab people, round them up, and then deport them. That is not what we do.
Unnecessary violence has been happening since the Metro surges began, and HSI had to back up investigations of assaults against officers where there was no assault, and they started it.
So you think there's a critical misunderstanding on behalf of the public as to what ICE actually is?
I think so. We have child exploitation, which is a huge component of what we do.
They're kidnapping kids, buying and selling kids, bribing officials, killing people, all for the purpose of exploiting underage kids.
The internet has opened some doors for the world. Watching the Artemis mission live, coolest shit ever. Knowing that you can just jump on the internet and meet with a child and them terrible.
Since Trump got into office, there's been 33% less federal agent hours spent pursuing child predators than there was beforehand. Have there been child exploitation cases that have been basically thrown out as a result of moving HSI manpower over to places like Minneapolis to enforce immigration?
There have absolutely been leads that have been uninvestigated or closed out prematurely because we don't have the manpower or the priority to focus on that.
The immigration enforcement and now our criminal enforcement, that's all merged. It makes our job a lot more difficult.
It definitely feels like my purpose has been destroyed. I have no doubt that the American people have lost their faith in us. I lost our faith in us.
You got fired from ICE for something you said about Israel. What was the process like?
No grant rights were read. They didn't ask me about my side of events. They're just like, you're being terminated for misconduct, which is weird to me because being a cop from other agencies, usually IA is supposed to like take a sworn statement from you regardless of whether or not you're being fired.
Do you think race played a role in you actually getting fired and singled out?
I'm pretty positive because I've seen officers commit actual misconduct on camera, say things they're not supposed to, and they didn't get fired or written up.
The termination letter quotes, "I knew my girl was the one when she said she hated Jews in Israel."
Yeah.
So you never sent anything remotely.
No, that was a different officer that said that.
What's up, guys? Andrew Callahan here, Channel 5 News. We got a pretty hot one coming down the pipeline today. It's officially been about 4 months since Operation Metro Surge wrapped up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. During the operation, nearly 4,000 people were arrested and 2 people were killed by either DHS, Border Patrol, or ICE agents. Metro Surge was likely carried out to make good on Trump's second-term campaign promise of mass deportations and likely to appease his campaign donors over at CoreCivic and Geo Group, who are yielding astronomical profits as we speak from private detention contracts and have a vested interest in filling as many beds as humanly possible at all times. And with how fast things move in the news cycle nowadays, it's hard for the operation to not feel like ancient history. If you can recall, last February, we were on the 1-yard line of a watershed Epstein moment that threatened to expose the inner workings of an elite circle of pedophile billionaires at the very top, who many suggest control our media and politicians through coercive blackmail. But then, Renee Good and Alex Preddy were killed. Operation Metro Surge wrapped up. Then we had the war in Iran, the kidnapping of President Maduro in Venezuela, perhaps the upcoming invasion of Cuba, the new season of Euphoria, and an endless array of meaningless cultural war issues sprinkled on top of it all by the mainstream press to keep us divided, distracted, docile, and drowning in dog shit. But what happened back in Metro Surge is important. It represents a massive waste of taxpayer money and federal resources. Minneapolis is not in a better place than it was before Metro Surge. In fact, it's in a worse place. DHS's shenanigans in Minnesota over the winter cost the city of Minneapolis approximately $200 million in losses, $5 million in police overtime hours, $81 million in lost revenue for local businesses, and workers lost over $47 million in wages. For a look back, here was the scene on the ground less than 2 days after the killing of Renee Good.
If you're scared to come outside, what are you waiting for next? American citizens are being shot in the street. This administration is not following court orders. They're sending citizens out of the country. Are you waiting for them to come knock on your door like J.D. Vance said?
Minneapolis Public Schools have canceled classes for the next 2 days.
The teachers union says this comes after ICE showed up to the campus of one of their Minneapolis schools.
What else are you fucking waiting for?
So throughout that operation, a lot of journalists who aren't me also did some fantastic interviews capturing the passionate perspective of protesters. And on the right-wing side of things, high-up government officials were also barking and making a lot of noise as well, especially Kristi Noem. Shout out to Brian. Bimbo's on top. But one perspective left out entirely is the perspective of the ICE agents themselves. From what I've been told, today's interview with 3 different agents is the first time that individual ICE agents who are masked in the field have gotten on camera to speak their minds since the operation concluded. I should note these interviews were only made possible because of the assistance of our buddy Carl, who you'll meet in a minute. Now, before proceeding, I just want to establish one important fact. There is no such thing as an ICE agent.
So under DHS, there's lots of different agencies. ICE itself, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is made up of enforcement and removal operations, ERO.
ICE is made up of ERO, which is enforcement and removal operations. They handle the immigration and detention side of our agency. And then ICE is also made up of HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations.
So which department exactly are you employed by?
I'm Homeland Security Investigations.
And what sort of work do you guys do?
I mentioned we have a really broad scope of federal statutes that we investigate. We are the investigative arm under DHS. ERO is responsible for enforcement and removal. They work a lot with other countries when red notices are issued and fugitives need to be found who don't have status, things like that.
HSI has handled a lot of very famous cases in the last couple of years. The Sean Combs case, that was pretty famous. HSI has also been involved in the El Chapo and currently the President Maduro case out of Venezuela.
What was internal dialogue like at HSI after the release of the redacted Epstein files?
As law enforcement officers, we want to believe that the people who were investigating those looked at that stuff and did what they could. If I don't believe that, I don't know what to do.
This must be a weird feeling. You're working for the government. Then you see the government release these files that they had been gatekeeping for years, which seem to implicate a lot of connected, powerful people to pedophilia, which is the exact thing that you were fighting against, among other things. Did you feel betrayed?
A little bit. I'm not surprised. It's not the first time I've heard that people in Hollywood or the music industry are like kids. The eating kids thing, that was bad. I wanted to throw up at that one. Yeah, I feel betrayed. I feel like, why are we holding on to this? Why are we gatekeeping this?
As I mentioned, these interviews were only possible because of my boy Carl. You guys want to meet Carl? I have fantastic news. Here he is.
My name's Carl. I'm an investigative journalist. I've been labeled the ICE Whisperer by Wired. I didn't give myself that name, but I've been interviewing ICE agents for the past 2 months straight.
How did you establish such close contact with ICE agents?
I don't think I do anything special other than offer a voice of neutrality, but more importantly, like I'll listen. My questions are to keep them talking. That's my whole goal. I don't hit them with any gotcha stuff or try to prove a point. And I've received a lot of hate for it, a tremendous amount of hate for just interviewing them in the first place.
What do people say?
Like, you shouldn't be platforming people, which I think is total fucking bullshit. A lot of heat for like, you need to dox these people, you need to dox these agents, these people are monsters. But also beyond that, a lot of support. So I get messages from people who are like, I fucking hate ICE. I'm the most anti-ICE person, but like these interviews are eye-opening.
What is the security risk for the agents who are participating in this piece?
I mean, the security risk is if they talk to the media, they can get fired, basically. That's it. There's also a risk for us. Keeping the identities anonymous doesn't only protect them, it protects us as well. So if there's some crazy group that's like, give me their info, we don't know their info.
I hope every one of those lawless who call ICE officers get doxxed one by one and they get the public shaming they deserve.
I do all my interviews through an encrypted texting app called Signal, which hopefully you guys can put up my info. Keep messaging me.
It's going to be on screen.
That's an end-to-end encrypted app. From that app, the interviews move to another app that's also end-to-end encrypted, but it is not a US-based company. So there is no way a US warrant or subpoena could ever get into that chat. So that's my double layer of security, just how I make contact and how I make interviews.
What can you tell us about our first interviewee?
So our first interviewee is an HSI agent.
Gangs, drugs, firearms, human trafficking, human smuggling, intellectual property rights, the logo on the movies before when we watched VHS, like don't copy this, that type of stuff. Or it's an antiquities theft, repatriating stolen artwork from grave robbers or, back to their home country. There's such a large scope of things that we can investigate under HSI.
The second one is also HSI. This interview is kind of sensitive, but this agent also combats child trafficking, amongst other things, in a more hands-on manner.
We are not deportation officers who go out and grab people, round them up, and then deport them. That is not our primary function. That is not what we do. Since January, February of last year, that is what our agency has been pushing us to do. That has put a halt to our criminal investigations.
And you're going to conduct that second interview because you have a pretty good rapport with this person.
Yes, I've been building a relationship with all these agents for like a very long time now. I put hundreds and hundreds of hours into just building and keeping this trust.
You're down to wear a brown suit, right?
Whatever I need to do, man.
You need aesthetic consistency.
Whatever I need to do.
I have an extra tie for you too.
Do you think that HSI and ERO should be separated?
Yes. At one point, there was a huge push to separate ERO and HSI. At one point, ERO was called DRO, which was Detention and Removal Operations, and HSI was called OI, which is Office of Investigations. That split up to what we know now as ERO and HSI. A lot of managers and a lot of people in Washington, D.C. were pushing to have those two agencies completely separate. And there was great momentum in doing that. And then all of a sudden, that all fell apart when we, as HSI, were merged once again with ERO to go pick up illegal immigrants who were working as landscapers or working at restaurants.
That arrest went viral on social media. It shows the 48-year-old pinned to the ground and punched before being taken into custody. Authorities say Barranco assaulted federal agents with a weed whacker, but no such charge was ever filed.
So you feel like Operation Metro Surge was bad optics?
Definitely bad optics. It's not new that sanctuary cities and sanctuary states have a different type of crime problem. That's not new information. We learn how to work in those areas, and we have systems in place with our partner agencies to make things happen. And I think that Metro Surge probably single-handedly destroyed a lot of those relationships in these sanctuary cities and states and have set us up for probably another decade of trying to rebuild that relationship.
What are some major mistakes that you think were made?
Maybe going too hard, too fast. There are problems that need to be solved, but you just can't come in like a wrecking ball and change everything in a heartbeat. There has to be some consensus among leadership and some consideration of the front line, the ones who are doing the work.
How did you feel about the killing of Renee Good?
Made me sick. I know that you guys have heard it before, that we sometimes feel like they're waiting for one of us to be shot and killed. As an example, again, another person who didn't deserve to die.
So you feel like the agents that were involved in that situation did the wrong thing?
We are held to some case law that makes determinations about when uses of force are right or wrong or objectively reasonable. While I am not in a place to make that determination for each of the agents involved, it definitely feels wrong to me.
How did incidents like that impact morale within ICE?
There's some division amongst law enforcement in general as well with those. Everybody has their opinions. That was right, it was wrong, he should have done this, he should have done that. We're human, we have divisions amongst all of us. And I think both of those came at a time where we were already in such a low morale situation. There is some compassion amongst all of us. We're all in a position where we were working 6-7 days a week, 12-hour shifts, didn't really have a say in how much we're working. And even people who are not law enforcement can understand that when you're being driven that hard, decision-making gets worse, emotions get heightened, things like that. So I think it just kind of illustrated and exacerbated the state we were already in.
You mentioned a couple different times the political goals of the Trump administration in deploying all of these federal agents and employees to Minneapolis at the same time. Why do you think the Trump administration did that in particular?
They weren't secretive in their platforms before election.
The Republican platform promises to launch the largest deportation operation in the history of our country.
When they were on the circuit, he was very clear. So I think, when people come in under asylum or trying to get asylum hearings, they're waiting 7 years for a hearing.
So you feel like increasing the amount of judges in the immigration courts
would be great.
Expediting the asylum seeking process would have been a way to avoid the situation.
Yeah, I think those would be great plans. I think our administration is just not thinking through the best way to tackle the problem and is just throwing resources in particular places and making a fool of us.
So you feel like a lot of the showmanship of Operation Metro Surge was what caused public trust to be lost?
Yeah. And Border Patrol is at the front of that. I don't think it turned out well.
So you don't like Bovino?
He's a figurehead. I don't know him, but no. Just the way Border Patrol is operating is vigilante-ish. It feels lawless. It feels aggressive. It feels unnecessary.
So you feel like the CBP Border Patrol guys who basically got deputized as ICE agents in Minneapolis were way out of line?
Yeah.
The fact that a lot of CBP Border Patrol agents are like working these borderlands where they're having to sort of like do snatch and grabs of people that have immediately hopped the border. Do you think that played a factor in how they behaved on the streets of Minneapolis?
Yes, it affects Minneapolis in the optics because they're operating as if anyone who looks like they may have crossed the border or didn't come from here is here illegally, because that's what they're used to. Like in Los Angeles, where they're just nabbing people off the street, trying to clean up a Home Depot parking lot for all the people waiting for work. Why do that? Those aren't the people we want. They just assume that everyone who's not white came across the border at some point in time. And they're coming from an area where everybody coming across the border was coming across illegally. So I don't know that they're properly educated on the laws. I don't know that they're properly guided by their leadership on how to handle encounters with people. Like, what is a consensual encounter? What is not? Yeah, they treated it like the border, and it's not the case. You can't just see somebody walking on the street and assume that because they're in a Hispanic neighborhood that they are here illegally.
According to our third ICE whistleblower source, this kind of racism is also endemic within HSI itself, not just among Border Patrol agents being deputized to Minneapolis, LA, and elsewhere.
I know when I first got into ICE, my supervisor had let me know hey, we've had guys get grabbed by other officers, be it local police or other ICE officers, just assuming they're a detainee based on how they look like. So he's stick close to me if you ever go deep south or any of those weird facilities.
So you're Hispanic and Native American. Can you tell us a little bit about the racism that you did face?
So the discrimination kind of came when I was visiting Charlotte office, which wasn't my home office. I was the sole officer that people were kind of focusing in on with making jokes or just making out random comments. I had one recruit come up to me and be like, hey, I bet I could take you in jiu-jitsu out of random. And I just had another white officer point directly at me hey, get his brown ass in line with the other detainees. I literally turned and looked at him, and I literally just lift up my hoodie to show my credentials, my ID, hey, I'm not a detainee. And that's where it kind of dawned on me, oh, these guys kind of have something against individuals of colors, or at least a few of their staff members do.
Despite keeping quiet about these incidents on an HR level, this officer was fired very shortly after for apparently making an anti-Semitic comment that he says he never made to a different officer during an ERO operation.
Like I said, I wasn't even pulled aside by anybody. I wasn't asked a question. I wasn't told hey, this person claimed you said this. It was just one day they just pulled me aside. They're just hey, you're being fired for officer misconduct. And they hand me that letter, no names on it, just a vague quote.
Yeah, what did that quote say?
Something to the effect of, I knew my girl was the one when she said she hated Jews in Israel.
The termination letter quotes, I knew my girl was the one when she said she hated Jews in Israel.
Yeah.
So you never sent anything remotely?
No, that was a different officer that said that. In that moment during the transportation operation, it was out of pocket because we were all in a van. Just everyone was talking. I wasn't talking. I was just quiet. I was sitting in the middle. But nobody had said anything when the guy blurted it out. So everyone just kept it pushing to get the objective done.
Despite this, he was reported shortly after and immediately fired.
Did anything happen to them?
I have no idea if that recruit was fired or nothing was told of me, like of any of the other officers facing disciplinary or even my side being asked like, hey, do you hear any other officer engage in misconduct? No rights were read. They didn't ask me about my side of events. They're just like, you're being terminated for misconduct.
Are you pursuing any sort of legal action?
I'm pursuing right now an EEO claim, which sadly, as a legal matter, can take at best a year, sometimes longer, because the government contracts out to investigate that. And I do have a lawyer on standby, and lawyers just like wait for their ROI results before you pursue this fully in court because it costs money. So that's where I'm at right now.
Most people don't know that Border Patrol is over 50% Hispanic, and ICE is roughly 30% Hispanic, and nearly half of ICE is non-white. Why do you think so many Hispanic people decide to take jobs in immigration enforcement?
I think it has a lot to do with the communities growing up on the borders and seeing the issues. And then for the people that weren't on the borders, they kind of have families that are down in Mexico and they're affected by crimes regarding the cartel. So a lot of people typically from those communities join law enforcement with noble intentions of like, I want my community to be better. I don't want to just say it. I want to be a part of that change. So when you have these young people from these communities coming to these agencies, they're trying to change it for the better.
What do you think like they see in these communities that have them like enlist or join?
In those communities, you see a lot of cartel come through the border. Like there's a lot of cartel and narco terrorists that are in the United States that operate within it. And they see people get kidnapped from the community. They see people get murdered. They have family members that they're aware that get murdered, harassed, or overseas by cartel members. So because of them being either directly affected by it or just seeing it, they're like, I want to protect people and go after these very, very bad men that think they could get away with it.
Hey, what's up, you guys? As I'm sure you know, in today's episode, we spoke to ICE and DHS agents about the nuances and divisions within the actual organization itself. But what about current ICE news today? More specifically, how is the mainstream media covering modern ICE operations in the May of 2026? Where should I go to figure this out? Maybe a dope-ass news aggregate called Ground News, which I'm gonna pull up right now on my phone. And I'm typing in the phrase ICE agent, where I found this story. An agent in Minnesota named Gregory Donald Morgan Jr. just got charged with not one, but 2 counts of second-degree assault after prosecutors say he pulled his service weapon out on civilians during a road rage incident on the highway. As some would say, he upped the pole on some civilian. This particular story has 189 sources. Using this Ground News bias distribution tool, you can see the political leanings of the sources here. You can really feel the power of language when it comes to how the incident is being described to their target audience. For example, left-leaning audiences use words like criminally charged when describing the perp. Then, of course, right-leaning coverage focuses on the case's prosecutor, calling them a far-left and blue state actor. So how does that bias hit in mainstream headlines considered to be center by some cable audience demographics? Naturally, on Ground News here, I scroll down to see what Fox News has to say. So it says, Minnesota prosecutor charges ICE agent in gun incident as Savannah Hernandez case remains uncharged. Savannah Hernandez has nothing to do with the specific road rage incident. A pretty convenient reframe that keeps things in the two-party political echo chamber while simultaneously depriving the Fox News audience of key information. That's the story Fox is pushing, and some of us know why, but if you don't, go to the factuality and ownership panel in the Ground News app and you'll figure out who owns Fox News, and boom, Ground News, you figured it out. All right, let's read a headline from a left-leaning outlet called Slate, why the new criminal charges against an ICE agent in Minneapolis could be a true turning point. Then last but not least, Reuters. So on Reuters it says, prosecutors in a Minnesota county charge an ICE agent with assault. That's it. Straightforward clinical analysis, no spin, the facts as they are. Reuters. So now we've seen 3 versions of the exact same story that all honestly contain valuable information and allow you, news consumer, to develop a more rounded view of this story. Ground News lays the whole picture out at once. Who's covering it, how they're framing it, what factuality rating the outlet carries, and who owns them. I use this shit every day, and it's a perfect partner for Channel 5 because our missions effectively align. And guess what? You too can be just like me if you subscribe right now through my link, which is ground.news/channel 5, currently available in the description box and pinned comment of this video, or just scan the QR code on screen that you see right now. You're gonna get 40% off the unlimited Vantage plan, which is the best plan Ground News has to offer, bringing the cost down to less than $5 a month. But I think that at this point, you know what to do. Anyways, back to Trump's motivations for his initial raids in Los Angeles, which came a few months before Minneapolis metro surge.
You feel like it was cruel?
Definitely.
What motivated some of that cruelty?
Oh, it felt petty and personal between Trump and Newsom.
On the other hand, what do you think Trump's gripe was with Minneapolis and Minnesota? Does it connect to the riots?
Nick Shirley definitely made a fool out of him, or out of law enforcement in general, by highlighting all that fraud. And he just saw probably Tim Walz, his opponent, another petty nonsense, and look at this mess you're in. I'm going to come clean it up for you. It feels very petty. I don't see righteous motives.
Do you think it was public pressure from the protesters and the media that led to Metro Surge ending?
Probably. I would think that some leaders felt that pressure and got the top to agree to dial it back.
We've had great success with this operation, and we're leaving Minnesota safer.
So in a way, the protest aims were somewhat effective.
I don't generally feel like protests do that much, but I think the visibility of all of it definitely helped move things along.
One of the biggest things they need to take in mind is that immigration and the immigration politics are very nuanced. It's not black and white, and people need to find kind of a middle ground, because you have to have a key focus of safety for the community and how you let people in and out of this country. But you also can't let standards slip to where you start seeing these instances of officers using too much force, not understanding legal protocol.
Was Renee Good a criminal? No. Was she acting like a bitch? Yeah. Was she blocking the street, antagonizing cops, chasing them, preventing them from doing their job? Sure. Should she have gone to jail? Sure. Should she have been whipped out of that car and probably beat the fuck out of? Sure. But there's so many different ways to skin that cat, and she could have been dealt with a lot differently. And everyone in that conga line of vehicles that were actively hindering the job of ICE that day, they could have been dealt with a lot different. And that comes down to experience, that comes down to training, and that comes down to leadership. And there was no leadership. In the Renee Good shooting, you had an officer who found himself in the same exact situation, same exact predicament, and was not only hit but dragged by a vehicle. And now in the Renee Good shooting, he's found himself in the same exact position.
So if that officer was just hit and dragged by a car, went through this traumatic event, why was he out there in Minneapolis in the most heated part of the country?
Because the agency needed numbers and was sending everyone. He should not have been out on the street. He should have been doing something else.
Yep, you heard that right. The officer who killed Renee Good was in the exact same situation a year prior, making a routine traffic stop, after which he was dragged by a car and ended up in the hospital. He was then put back on the street to fill a quota, and it cost an American citizen their life. For our interviewees, this sort of thing doesn't only erode public trust. It threatens the future funding for HSI, which they all joined to combat human and/or child trafficking in one way or another.
Growing up, I got to see people be impacted by human trafficking and the destruction it does to their lives, how long it takes to get back to normal.
I think people don't realize what the dark underbelly is until they see it, and then they're, holy shit, right?
Well, for those unaware, how big is the child exploitation industry?
There are thousands of cyber tips reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, thousands a month. It may be something as simple as someone sharing child pornography. It may be something like they're chatting with someone who might be a minor, or it might be so big that law enforcement needs to act immediately. Before COVID, before everybody got sent home to do everything online, it wasn't so significant. It doesn't mean that the crime wasn't as prevalent. It just changed dramatically to this online platform during COVID. People don't realize that every time a child is on a digital device unmonitored, they're going to be contacted by someone with nefarious intent. And hopefully we've had those conversations with our children and they know how to handle stranger danger online. And then there's, the aspect of people known to us. The majority of kidnappings, child, hands-on offenses are adults known to them.
When talking to agents, their emphasis on the sheer scale of the booming child exploitation industry is constant, and it's due to this that so many of them have become disillusioned with the Trump administration. As I mentioned in the intro of this piece, a recent lawsuit revealed that Trump diverting HSI manpower over to ERO deportation work has resulted in 33% fewer hours being spent by ICE on child exploitation cases. Additionally, indictments have dropped by 28%, child rescues have dropped by 17%, and the DOJ recently slashed funding and training resources for law enforcement working on investigations and prosecutions of sex crimes against children.
What's morale like in HSI?
We feel somewhat defeated, disappointed, frustrated, like our time is being wasted. You know, for most of my career, immigration enforcement was a tool that could be used to remove people involved in criminal activity where there wasn't another way to get them. It was a tool, a resource, something that could be used. It wasn't the focus of the investigation. The focus of the investigation was criminal charges, federal crimes, jail time, saving victims, and now 2025 and forward, it is the mission. The mission is wrapping up as many people as possible for immigration violations.
Was HSI involved in the prosecution of a group known as 764?
We do have some investigations in that.
And for those who don't know, that was a Discord server of child porn consumers and creators. And it was really a sextortion ring led by actually high schoolers. The leader of it is his life sentence now, but I think he was 15 or 16 when it started. Basically, they'd use Roblox, like you said, to get someone involved in the sextortion ring and process. And then they would encourage them to self-harm, sometimes even commit suicide, eat their own hair, kill their own cats, and then produce child porn of their own to feed back to the same people who extorted them in the first place. So it's just about the darkest thing I've ever heard or read about in my entire life. So I was wondering, in this job, have you seen things that you've had a hard time coping with?
Absolutely. Secondhand PTSD is legit. I have a particular case, a particular video that lives rent-free in my head that at times, you know, will be triggered. I'm just like emotionally unable to continue whatever task it is that I'm doing.
When you said the video that bothered you, was it a child pornography video?
Yes, a child pornography case, child video.
It's one thing to just like investigate the criminals, but you're actually having to sift through probably hours of this content. Cumulatively, how much child sex abuse material do you think you've had to ingest?
I personally would say I've seen millions. There are resources available to us as investigators, you know, mental health support, things like that, but it is woefully insufficient for the damage that this job does.
Jared Fogle, the spokesperson for Subway, is set to be released this year. He was convicted on possessing and distributing child pornography. He was very famous. He was an influential person, and now he's going to be released. The chances of him going back to viewing and distributing images of child exploitation are pretty high. The recidivism rate for these child predators and the people who consume this type of material is pretty high, and we always see them again.
Do you think that people like that can be rehabilitated?
No. I don't. The best they can hope for is to be controlled.
Are there any particular multiplayer video games or social media platforms that predators prefer to use?
If it's there, they will use it. Obviously, the less monitoring that there is, the more they'll use it. Roblox being a huge one, Discord, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all of those social medias are a risky place. And then they often will try to divert conversations to an encrypted platform like Signal, Kik, WhatsApp, things like that. So if you're seeing those things on a child's phone, it's a red flag immediately.
And what is the usual process of approach?
It depends. If it's, say, a teenage male, they will often create profiles that appear to be a cute female, high school age, strike up a relationship, prey on their raging teenage hormones, and get them to send something that's inappropriate. And maybe the intent is just for sextortion. They're just trying to get money and not necessarily child porn. But then you have the ones coming after the females who are going to speak to their need for validation, tell them that they're beautiful, or start a relationship that way. But with all offenders, you know, grooming is what happens. It's the same. So whatever it is that the child responds to and considers their currency, that's what they're going to use. So in Roblox, they're offering Robux.
And you mentioned the process of sextortion. Could you explain what that means? How it works?
Sextortion is the act of soliciting sexual images for the purpose of then threatening to release them if they don't pay. So just like any kind of extortion, give me your lunch money or I'll beat you up. They get them to send an image or video or live stream or something, and they record it, and then they threaten to send it to their families, their friends, news outlets, law enforcement.
The era that we're in with new technology, with AI, with 100 different new applications coming out on your devices every single day makes it extremely difficult for us to combat these predators. I believe child exploitation investigations are underfunded. If we were to see an increase in funding nationwide for these types of cases, you would see a significant decrease in the amount of CSAM going around, and you would see a significant increase in people being arrested, prosecuted, and jailed because they're conducting these types of crimes.
Can you explain what CSAM is for anyone who doesn't know, and why trying to combat that versus narcotics is such a different game?
CSAM is child sexual abuse material. Combating CSAM as opposed to combating the narco trafficking is very sensitive. The United States is widely known as the major consumer of narcotics and illicit substances, and we lose hundreds of thousands of U.S. citizens a year to narcotic overdoses. One of the big ones that we're trying to combat now is fentanyl. On the flip side, CSAM, the child sexual abuse material, these are little kids. They're not voluntarily having sex with adults. They're not voluntarily taking off their clothes and masturbating at 6 years old. They don't know what they're doing. They're afraid. They're being forced to do these things. These are the real victims. They're waking up in the morning in the hands of a trafficker, and they're being exploited, and they're being fucked. Even before all of this started blowing up on social media, you would see it in these shows like Dance Moms or Cheer Moms, and these little girls dancing and cheerleading, and the moms all over, national televised shows. And, every Thursday night you can tune into the Dance Moms or Cheer Moms, and you have a little 8-year-old girl doing splits on national TV, and she's wearing extremely tight clothes, and these parents, they don't care. They think it's cool to exploit their kids for fame or for money or whatever it is. But you can see how it is the exploitation of these kids already. That Cheer Mom has that same mentality. Oh, my daughter, she's fine. She's not doing anything inappropriate. Doing splits on national TV, showing her ass, twerking. Millions of people watching this. It's the same concept now as the guy in his house asking, Girl Scouts to pose for child erotica type pictures in their bikinis and showing their Girl Scout cookies. And as long as they're not showing their vagina, they're good to go, but their Girl Scout cookies are covering their nipples.
So you think child exploitation has become basically a part of American pop culture?
I believe so. Back in the day, you had Dateline To Catch a Predator. Everyone, the entire country would watch that 1 hour of Dateline, and it was coming out every week. Just people wanted to see predators get caught.
What can you tell me about sex tourism and what HSI does to combat that?
HSI is on the forefront of combating sex tourism all across the globe. The main consumers are going to be United States citizens. They travel to countries that are usually poor because the American dollar goes a long way. These sex tourists can buy underage kids to fuck them, and they produce child pornography, and then they distribute it amongst themselves and amongst their community.
So to go full circle back to immigration, now we can see how devastating it could be if an HSI agent was pulled off one of these cases that you just explained to go deport a non-violent criminal.
Do you have any colleagues who've quit?
Yes. I have colleagues who have changed agencies. I have colleagues who've quit altogether.
Have you considered quitting?
I have.
I stay here in this job and keep doing my job because someone has to do it. When this particular pendulum swings back, there has to be good agents, good AUSAs, good whatever left to do the work.
I have considered quitting multiple times. However, I am extremely passionate about protecting our children.
And after all of this, do you ever regret joining?
Same answer I gave when I left my police department. Like, I never regret being in law enforcement because I've been blessed to actually help save lives. I've handled child abuse cases. I've gotten very bad people off the street. And that's kind of like the goal as a police officer, is like really getting bad people off the streets that harm our community. So I will never regret joining it because, like, at the end of the day, I help people be where they are today. And if it wasn't for me, they might not even be here still.
And you joined ICE because of the Shadow Wolves. So can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Shadow Wolves for a long time was a component of HSI, but they weren't 1811s when they started out. They were ATL1s.
So for those who don't know, the Shadow Wolves are a Department of Homeland Security and I guess ICE who work on the U.S.-Mexico border, particularly the Tohono O'odham Reservation, which borders the U.S. and Mexico. And they use ancient pre-colonial tribal tracking techniques to stalk mostly narcos through the Sonora Desert and arrest them.
Mostly human traffickers. Shadow Wolves are an all-native special sector of ICE that combats human trafficking on reservations and borderlands.
So the Shadow Wolves primarily work the border where it connects to the reservations. So having Native Americans work the res, you have someone that is familiar with the community. They might not give you as much grift as they would an outsider because they kind of know you. And then you have the elements of understanding the locals' language and the land. You're always going to have a home field advantage working in your hometown versus somebody that's never been in your hometown because you know the little shortcuts. So that's kind of like the idea behind why you'll have a preference towards hiring Native Americans for that unit, is that if you're working on the reservation, you're able to do some amount of effective work when it comes to drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking. In the reservations, like, there's a lot of issues. Like, it is a hot pot when you go down that road. Like, you have issues regarding law enforcement and the fact that they never always handle case well. You also have the factor of how the government set it up for the FBI and other federal agencies where legal powers of jurisdiction comes into play so heavily, like of whether or not FBI can investigate, or if the death isn't ruled a homicide, if it rules like natural causes from the elements, like if it goes to the U.S. Marshals. Because the U.S. Marshals just started their program where they help assist with murder or missing individuals because they can cross the federal and state lines off a reservation into another state. Also, the reservation tribe leaders, where the tribe leaders are corrupt and they kind of don't want to admit where they kind of have their own people playing an issue. Because when it comes to child abuse, sex trafficking, much like the Tim Brown Foundation had talked about, a lot of the offenders are typically family members or people know within the community. As much as it's sad to say, a lot of times a child-based sex offender is someone that you know.
Did your heritage play a part in your decision to join ICE?
Yes, Yaqui tribe plays a role in the Shadow Wolves and the element of ICE because of the reservation's location to the border.
There's a huge cartel presence on reservations, particularly here in Arizona, but also up in Montana.
Yes, of course. That, you know, the cartel, that's where a lot of this trafficking comes from. But this has been reported before. You know, human trafficking and child exploitation amongst like Native women is a huge issue.
Human trafficking of Native women is one of the most unreported cases in the country. You know why that is?
I think a lot of it has to do with, like, one, like, the community doesn't really trust law enforcement in the United States government, which you can't really blame them because you have a lot of abuse, racism, and mistreatment throughout the years by the government towards them. But then you also have the elements of, much like the Tim Brown Foundation talked about, like, certain types of offenders are people that you know in the community, and having that hard conversation of like looking at people that, where people don't want to have that hard conversation and be like, hey, certain times the people that are trafficking these women and children within this community are people that we know within the tribes themselves. So I think that also plays a role in why it's not as reported, because you'll have tribal members that are the criminals that don't want that information to get out, so they'll try to suppress it by kind of like playing the game of messing with the politics, of where they'll target the tribal leaders and go after them.
In your original interview with Carl, you mentioned that the government is a rite of passage for Native people, a way off the reservation, a path to leadership. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So usually, like, every tribe is different, but like for a lot of tribes to kind of get to that chief role or a leadership role, you have to meet certain objectives that your tribe sets out in order for you to get to those spots. So a lot of tribal members usually go into the military, not usually law enforcement, but law enforcement, you do have us there. And in the military, it gives you that life experience. You're able to complete a certain amount of the tasks that your tribe has set out for you. it is a way off the reservation, because a lot of times, like, you're so poor and there's not a lot of resources easily close to the reservation that you're usually stuck there if you don't take the opportunity from the government to get off.
And is there other ways to accomplish like that same amount of rite of passage?
When there's a will, there's a way. It's just harder because the resources aren't entirely there. And based on where your reservation is, it can be even harder reaching outside of it to find jobs and work the areas you need to work on.
Again, like, a big theme of this trip is that we're learning what ICE really is and what ICE does, and that's like a perfect example. ICE has an all Native American, anti-human trafficking group that's like using ancient tracking techniques to like take down the bad guys. Like, that's pretty fucking cool.
I see this piece as being pretty much totally nonpartisan, because whether you're like a close the border, stop the immigration guy, or if you're like a no one's illegal on stolen land guy, it's beneficial to everybody to understand exactly what ICE is, how the departments are divided, and what they do.
No matter what side you're on, if you're the most fuck ICE person ever, if you're the most pro-law enforcement person ever, like, very important that we understand what we're talking about before we take such strong opinions.
Channel 5 Live worldwide, Hollywood and Vine. Fuck the authority, Channel 5 News. Channel 55. We don't fuck with custers. And 5 is the best number.